The wind howled like a wounded animal across the Montana plains, driving snow so thick that Jacob couldn't see his own barn from the porch of his weathered cabin. He'd lived through 30 winters in this unforgiving territory, but this blizzard was something different, something meaner. The thermometer had dropped below zero 2 days ago and showed no signs of climbing back up. Jacob pulled his worn coat tighter around his shoulders and squinted into the white void. He was about to turn back inside when he heard it, faint beneath the wind screaming, a sound that made his blood run cold. It was a horse's whinny, desperate and terrified, followed by what might have been a human cry. Without thinking, he grabbed the rope from his porch post, the one he used to find his way to the barn in weather like this, and tied it around his waist. Then he stepped into the blizzard, following that sound with nothing but instinct and stubbornness to guide him. The cold hit him like a wall, stealing his breath and biting through his layers of clothing as if they were paper thin. He found her about 50 yards from his cabin, collapsed in the snow beside a fallen horse. The animal was still breathing but badly injured, its leg bent at an unnatural angle. The woman lay motionless, her expensive riding coat crusted with ice, her face already turning blue. Jacob didn't hesitate. He scooped her up in his arms, surprised by how light she was, and followed his rope back to the cabin, leaving the horse where it lay. In weather like this, the animal wouldn't last another hour, but a human life took precedence. Inside, he laid her on his only bed, near the poppily stove that barely kept the single room warm. He stripped off her wet outer clothes with clinical efficiency, years of tending injured animals having taught him that modesty mattered less than survival. He wrapped her in every blanket he owned, then heated water on the stove to clean the gash on her forehead where she must have hit the ground. For 3 days she drifted in and out of consciousness, mumbling words he couldn't quite catch. Jacob tended to her with the same care he'd give a newborn calf, spooning broth into her mouth when she could swallow, keeping the fire burning day and night even though it meant using what he'd rationed for the rest of winter. He didn't know who she was, and he didn't particularly care. She was a human being in need, and that was enough. On the 4th day, the blizzard finally broke. Jacob was at the stove making breakfast when he heard her voice, clear and strong for the first time. "Where am I?" He turned to find her sitting up in bed, her dark hair tangled around her shoulders, her gray eyes sharp and alert despite the bruise that colored half her face. "My cabin, about 15 miles northeast of Copper Springs," he said, bringing her a cup of coffee. "You took a fall from your horse in the blizzard. Don't remember?" She accepted the coffee with hands that trembled slightly. "I remember riding. I was trying to reach town before the storm hit, but I misjudged the distance." She looked around the sparse cabin, taking in the rough-hewn furniture, the single window, the dirt floor swept clean. "How long have I been here?" 4 days. "Storm just broke this morning." 4 days, she repeated, something flickering across her face. "People will be looking for me." "Likely so," Jacob agreed. "Soon as it's safe to travel, I'll take you to town." "Horse didn't make it, I'm afraid. Broke its leg in the fall." She closed her eyes briefly, and he saw genuine pain there. "Thunder. His name was Thunder. He'd been with me for 8 years." They sat in silence for a moment, sharing that particular grief known to anyone who'd lost a loyal animal. Finally, she spoke again. "You saved my life. I don't even know your name." "Jacob Turner. And it's what anyone would do." "No," she said softly. "It's what you would do. Not everyone." She extended her hand. "My name is Catherine Winthrop." The name meant nothing to Jacob. He shook her hand and went back to making breakfast, scrambling the last of his eggs and frying salt pork in the ancient skillet. He divided the food evenly between them, though he noticed she ate only half of her portion despite looking like she needed it. He later found her share of the pork wrapped in a handkerchief on the table, and realized she tried to leave it for him. It made him smile despite himself. Catherine proved to be stronger than she looked. By the next day, she was up and moving around the cabin, insisting on helping despite his protests. She washed their few dishes, mended the tears in his shirts with thread from her own traveling bag, and even helped him tend to the 3 chickens and single cow that constituted his livestock. She didn't complain about the cold, the sparse accommodations, or the monotonous diet of cornmeal and whatever else he could scrape together. "You live alone out here?" she asked on the 3rd evening as they sat by the fire. "For about 5 years now. Had a wife once, but she passed. Fever took her." He stared into the flames. "Land's not much, and I'm barely making ends meet, but it's mine. Or will be, once I finish paying off the loan. It's a hard life," she observed. "It is," he admitted. "But it's honest. I work, I eat. I don't work, I don't eat. Simple as that." She was quiet for a long time. "I grew up very differently," she finally said. "I've never had to worry about whether I'd eat, or stay warm, or have a roof over my head. But I've also never felt as," she searched for the word, "as real as I've felt these past few days. Does that make sense?" "Reckon it does," Jacob said, though he privately thought that romanticizing poverty was a luxury only the wealthy could afford. On the morning of the 7th day, they heard horses outside. Jacob opened the door to find a group of well-dressed men on expensive mounts, led by a sharp-faced man in a fur coat that probably cost more than Jacob's entire property. "Miss Winthrop!" the man exclaimed, dismounting quickly. "Thank God we've found you. We've had search parties combing the territory for a week." Catherine stepped outside, and Jacob noticed how she seemed to transform, her posture straightening, her expression becoming more guarded. "I'm quite well, Harrison. Mr. Turner here saved my life." The man called Harrison looked at Jacob for the first time, his gaze sweeping over the worn clothes, the shabby cabin, the general poverty of the place. Something dismissive flickered in his eyes. "Of course. We're very grateful. We'll compensate you for your trouble, naturally." He pulled out a leather wallet and extracted some bills. Jacob's pride bristled, but he thought about the wood he'd burned, the food they'd eaten, the fact that his loan payment was coming due. He was about to accept when Catherine's voice cut through the cold morning air. "Put that away, Harrison. Mr. Turner's hospitality isn't something that can be measured in dollars." Harrison looked startled. "But surely," I said, "put it away." Her voice carried an authority that made the man immediately comply. She turned to Jacob. "Would you allow me to return when the weather improves? I have something I'd like to discuss with you." "Free country," Jacob said with a shrug. "You're welcome any time." She smiled, a genuine expression that made her look years younger. "Thank you, Jacob. For everything." He watched them ride away, a small army of servants and protectors surrounding her, and tried to ignore the hollow feeling in his chest. The cabin seemed especially empty that night. 3 weeks passed. Jacob threw himself into work, preparing for spring planting, repairing the fence line, trying not to think about gray eyes and the sound of her rare laughter. He told himself he was a fool, that she was clearly someone important who'd already forgotten about the poor rancher who'd pulled her from a snowdrift. Then one morning, he heard a wagon approaching. Catherine sat beside the driver, dressed in practical traveling clothes rather than the fine garments she'd worn before. Behind her wagon came another, this one loaded with supplies. "I told you I'd return," she said as she climbed down. "May I come in?" Inside, she got straight to business. "I haven't been entirely honest with you, Jacob. My full name is Catherine Winthrop, and my father was Charles Winthrop. Perhaps you've heard of him?" Jacob shook his head. "He owned half the railroads in the eastern states and had extensive mining interests in the west. When he died 2 years ago, everything came to me. I'm told I'm one of the wealthiest women in the territory, possibly the country." She said it matter-of-factly, without pride or shame. "I came west to oversee the mining operations personally because I don't trust the men who've been managing them. I was on my way to inspect a new site when the blizzard hit." Jacob didn't know what to say to that, so he said nothing. "Here's what I'd like to propose," Catherine continued. "You need capital to make this ranch sustainable. I have capital and no good way to judge who deserves investment and who doesn't. I've learned that wealth tends to blind people to character, but I saw your character in this cabin. You shared your last eggs with me, burned your winter wood to keep me warm, and never once asked who I was or what you might gain from helping me. I don't want charity, Jacob said stiffly. I'm not offering charity. I'm offering a partnership. I'll provide the capital to expand your operation, properly stock it, and get you through the next few seasons. In return, I'd like a percentage of the profits and— She hesitated. And your advice, occasionally, on matters of business. I've discovered that the wealthy are very good at protecting their money but very bad at understanding the people who actually create value in this world. I need someone who'll tell me the truth, not what they think I want to hear. Jacob studied her carefully. Why me? You could partner with any established rancher in the territory. Because you saw me as a human being first, not as Catherine Winthrop the heiress. Because you have integrity that can't be bought. And because— She smiled. Because I've never felt as peaceful as I did in this tiny cabin, drinking terrible coffee and eating cornmeal mush. You have something I've been searching for my whole life, Jacob. You have contentment. He looked around his shabby cabin, thinking about all the things he lacked, all the ways he barely scraped by. Then he looked at this woman who had everything money could buy and saw the loneliness in her eyes that mirrored his own. All right, he said finally. But on one condition. We're equal partners, 50-50, no matter who puts up the initial capital. And you're welcome here anytime, not as an investor but as a friend. This is your home too, if you want it. Her eyes glistened with unexpected tears. Deal, she whispered. They shook hands on it, two lonely souls who'd found each other in a blizzard, and began planning a future neither had dared imagine before. Outside, spring was coming to Montana, bringing with it the promise of new beginnings.